All right, so today we're going to be looking at Maya 2018 and its new UV Toolkit. We're going to be revisiting the board, apple, and nail project that we did earlier. And we're going to be using these models to explore the UV. So to start things off, we're going to open up our UV editor. You'll notice that this looks a little bit different than 2016, 2017. The new UV editor comes with a UV toolkit. I'm going to grab this and hover over the edge here and snap it right in so that as I move this around, it moves in conjunction. Now you'll also notice that unlike the old versions, everything in here now is gray. We don't have the different colored zero box right here, or zero location. Everything is the same general color. I'm not really sure why that change happened, but it's in there now. For the most part, we're going to be using the cut and unfold and align tools, and we might do a little bit of scaling based on Texel density, but for this particular project, Texel density isn't going to be hugely important because they're separate objects, so it won't be nearly as noticeable. So we're going to start off with the board. We can see that here, if I go to my UVs, we have the standard layout for a cube with all the additional edge loops and beveling inside of it. For this particular workflow, the first thing I'm going to do is go to face mode and join all of these cut edges. So the white edges are shared edges. So if I go to my edge mode, you can see if I hover over this, multiple red lines pop up. That's the same edge on the model, but it's cut for the UV layout so that you can get this nice flat layout. So we're going to combine all those together as painlessly as possible, as easily as possible. And I'm just going to do that with a UV snapshot, with a camera-based projection. So I'm going to come up here to UV and use camera-based, and it's going to give me this result. Now this is a direct correlation to the angle of my camera to the model. And generally speaking, you would never use this as a final layout. It's useless. But what it does do is it combines or recombines all those edges. You notice we don't have any white edges now. So everything is stitched back together as one giant shell. From here, we're going to go into edge mode inside of our viewport, and we're going to figure out how to take this 3D object and unwrap it into a 2D object. So if we look at this board, we want to think about it as if it's a cardboard box or a piece of clothing, and you're trying to figure out how to unfold it into one flat object. So to do this, I'm going to figure out which long side I want to cut, and then I'm going to take these edges here and I'm going to cut those into one giant flap. So I'm going to select an edge here. So I double click that edge and it gives me that entire length. Then I'm going to come down here, over, and up. Now I can tell based on this geometry that this is where the original intersection for the cube was. I'll hold down my Shift plus Control, grab that, and I can tell that that's the original intersection because of this little Y intersection right here. I'm going to add this, and I'm going to add that. Now notice I'm not going all the way around it, and that's because I want this to act as a hinge so that this whole area flaps outwards, and it'll make more sense once we finish this process. I'm going to pull back here, Shift plus Control and double click, double click, double click. And as always, you want to make sure you check your selection. Now for this board, we're basically done with our selection process. And now we're going to cut this thing up. So I'm going to come down and unminimize my UV editor and blow this up. Over on the right hand side in our UV Toolkit, we see the cut and sew drop down. Now we have two different cut tools here. One is called Cut Tool, and this one works interactively. You select it and then you just paint across the line and it cuts it. The other is a cut function. Because we've already selected our edges, we're going to use the cut function. I'm going to select that, and now you notice it looks like our line got thicker. I'm going to deselect out here. Now we have this white line that traces through our object right where we had selected. That is a cut edge, which is going to allow us to unfold this object. So I'm going to right click and go to UV shell mode. Notice now I can select here, and then I'm looking over here in my UV toolkit. We have the unfold. I'm going to select that and then come down to unfold. Now we have again an unfold tool, which is a paintbrush, and then unfold function, right? We're going to use the unfold function because we've already done all this and we don't need to paint. Frankly, I think optimize tool and optimize and unfold tool are still just a little bit buggy. I've never had good luck with those in the past, but the unfold function seems to work pretty well. So we're going to click that, and now we have our board pretty well lined up. Notice I'm going to hold down X. I'm going to snap this to the center real fast. If we take a look here, we can see that this is the edge. This is the end cap here and here. That's what we were creating that folded out. This is the slim edge and the opposing slim edge. And you have the top and the bottom all unfolded as if it's a piece of cardboard. All right. So I'm going to pull this down a little bit. And ideally I would put this over to the side, but the first thing we need to do is make sure that we square this up. Now we're going to square this up because it's going to make our life a little bit easier to apply a nice wood grain texture to this later. When we're texturing, we have, well, when we're doing our UV layouts, we have to consider how is this going to be textured. In this particular case, I know that I'm doing a wood texture, and I know that my UVs assign the location of the texture on my 3D model. But knowing that, I know that I can straighten these out a little bit, as long as I'm not distorting it too terrible bad. But I can straighten this out a little bit, apply a straight wood texture, and then that wood texture will bend to fit the contours of the wood model a little easier. That will save me time from having to adjust the straight texture of wood or wood grain, adjust that in Photoshop to a bent up UV shell, I should say. So we're going to use some align tools to straighten this out just a little bit. So if we look over here on the right hand side again, in the align and snap pull down, we have a good number, 6 different align tools, 3 verticals and 3 horizontals. These are just like Illustrator or Photoshop, work exactly the same. Select more than one object and then decide which direction you want to snap these to. So I'm going to come right click and go to UVs, and I'm going to start selecting down through this line. I'm starting on the left, and I'm going to move to the right, so I'm going to use my snap to the left, and I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to select. Now I can't, once I'm inside of here, I can't come down and just shift click this bottom one, because it's going to give me everything to the left because I'm selecting a cut edge out of here. But what I can do to speed this up is click here and shift click the second to last. Notice that selects all this, and then I just add one more click to get that bottom one and align to the left. I'm going to do that all the way here, and I can just hit G, which is repeat last function. And that'll speed our process up considerably. Every once in a while you're going to run into you didn't click fast enough, which can be a little annoying, but certainly not the end of the world. Just means you get to try again like I did there. Now you notice we're running into this little area right here. We have this and this, but I only aligned this center area, and I'm doing that for a reason right now. It's because this overlaps and this overlaps way over into here, and I'm using my left adjustment, so it would take all these and sling them real far over. So I'm just going to continue adjusting these real fast. And then I'm going to come back and grab these, move them to the left, so it's going to look like I'm messing it up in order to fix it. And that's essentially what I am doing, because I know where I want it to go. So I'm just going to move this over to one side here, move that over as well. I know that I want this spacing to be maintained. I'm going to do the same thing down here. So I'm going to grab these. I'm just going to adjust those over so that they're past this. And then I'm going to come here and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and adjust those. See how that lined that up. I'm going to do the same thing here. Bam. Now, this wasn't moved over far enough. You saw how it moved my bottom point. That's not what I want. There we go. I want my bottom point to stay in place, and I'm going to come up here to the top, do the same thing. I'm going to grab these, there, and there. Now we can come back out and finish this area. Every once in a while you find you have to make some larger adjustments or adjust them in and then realign things to make sure your spacing is still consistent, like I'm doing right there. So I'm doing is spacing these out because I know they're equidistant in my model, so I want to maintain that equidistance inside of my UVs for the most part. And that'll help me avoid stretching. And then I'll fix these here in a second as well. Alright, I'm going to fix this, pull that back out a little bit so that it maintains its equidistance from these two. Alright, now the next thing we're going to look at is squaring up these little tabs. Now these I'm going to leave alone because it's not going to matter a whole lot. But these areas are going to be our end grain. So that's the circular end grain for wood, where you can see the growth rings and so forth. Now to draw growth rings on something that's warped like this, or even worse, warped like this, would be rather difficult and would take longer to draw them or adjust my image inside of Photoshop for those growth rings than it would be to just adjust this inside of here. Now I'll get a little bit of warping in my texture, but not considerably, especially considering how long it would take in comparison to make the adjustments in Photoshop. So I'm just going to square these up just a little bit, and then I'm going to align them with my horizontal lines. So I'm going to grab this. I'm just going to use my center. That's fine. Whichever one you start with, though, I find it's best to stick with it. And it'll help keep all these pieces pretty well lined up. I'll bump that up just a little bit. There we go. I'm going to come down here to the bottom and do the same thing. Grab these, square those up a little bit, grab those. Yeah. Square that up just a little bit. Maybe we take all of that right there. Go like this. Like that. There we go. Now this area, we could straighten all that up, but it's not going to make a hill of beans worth of difference. If anything, this will give us less distortion and a better read on what actually is existing inside the model. I will, however, square these up. And I'll just leave these alone for now. So from here, this is pretty well done. I'm going to come back into my UV shell, select my UV shell. I'm going to hit X, snap it to this grid, and I'm going to scale it up so that it fits into this area pretty uniformly with just a slight buffer between the shell and the edge of its grid. So this black line right here and this blue line coming down are the edges of my 0-point grid here. So this is where my UV snapshot is going to take place. So I want that to occupy as much space as possible, but without overlapping. So I always try to imagine that there's like, 3 to 5 pixels worth of space, a little bit of air between the edge and my shell. And that's a good practice between additional shells as well, which we'll have here as soon as we finish up the nail and the apple. So from here, I'm going to exit out. Well, I can either X out or just minimize. I'm just going to minimize. This is currently complete. I'm going to go to object mode. I'm just going to hide this for now just to get out of my way so I can rotate around these other two freely. I'm going to hide my apple as well, and I'm going to work on the nail. And hide is H, and if you hit H again, it'll bring that object back. So if I hide the nail, and then I bring it back with H as well. So this nail has the same problems as the board, where it has the original cuts or original cut edges from when it was a cube, which is what this was modeled from. So we're going to do the same thing we did at first. I'm going to go in my face mode, double click it. Double click in face mode, we'll select all the faces on the object. And I'm going to go to UV, camera based. Notice all my white edges went away, which means that all the cuts are gone. Which means now we're starting with a clean slate. But it's pretty unusable. You can't texture this, right? Your textures will be stretched all over the place. So from here, we're going to look at this model and decide how is the audience going to see our model and how do we need to unwrap this to get the best results. So we know as a nail, more than likely the most common area a person's going to see is the top, followed by a little bit of the sides of that top. So if you're looking at a nail here, if this is driven into an object, and then if this happens to be sticking out, then we'll get to see a little bit of this. This is far less common that you'll see the underside of the nail inside of a game or even CG. But because we can see the bottom, I'm going to try to make sure that this edge here, I'm going to put my cut right here. I could also put my cut right here. Just depends on how I want to build this, but I think I'll get a little less distortion putting it right here on the bottom side of the bevel. So I'm going to come into my edge mode. I'm going to double click where I want this to split, and I'm going to separate the head from the bottom side of the nail. So I'm going to hold shift and double click that line, and then I'm just going to decide on which side I want this to split straight down the side. I'm just going to choose this one for now. Hold down my shift or shift and control, and I'm going to double click that. Now, one problem, because I double clicked that, I get this split all the way across, which splits my object in half, right? So I'm going to hit Z, undo that. That is not what I wanted. What I want is this line to here. So, oops. I'm going to shift plus control click this one and then come down to the bottom and double click this one. So this gives me the range between here and here. So now this will split and unwrap around, and this will be its own shell, this will be its own shell, and this top piece will be its own UV shell. So if I'm happy with that, obviously you always want to check your selection first. It's better to measure twice and cut once, as they say in woodworking or craftsmanship. Okay, so out here I'm going to come to cut function. Now we see all of our new lines. I come into my UV shell mode. Now we see that I have my object split into multiple shells. All right. From here, I'm just going to select all of those shells. I'm still in UV shell mode, so I marquee select those shells. And on the right hand side, I'm going to unfold. So right here, unfold. Now this is going to do its best job to figure out the placement and proper rotations and flips for each one of those so that it gets the most realistic layout that it can provide for that object. So this looks pretty good. We need to do a little bit of aligning, and these don't look too bad. So the first thing we're going to do is straighten up this nail so that it's easier for us to match up these two edges a little bit with a slightly repeated pattern, or just get a better cut on here. So I'm going to go UV mode again. I'm going to grab these edges, and we're going to use our align tool again. I'm just going to use my align left, like so. I'm just going to use that all the way across. Bam, bam. There we go. And just let this guy. There we go. Move that out just a little bit. Grab that, move that over, line it back up to the center where it belongs. And then I'm going to make sure that all of my horizontal lines are lined up. I'm just hitting G to repeat the last function, which makes this process go way faster. Alright, so that's nice and lined up. Looks pretty squared away. There we go. Everything looks relatively equidistant for the most part. So you're not going to have a whole lot of stretching or compressing going on inside of this. So we'll put this UV shell. Just going to move this over here for now, just so I can use this area to work. We're going to end up dragging it back over here in a second. Generally, when I'm working on multiple shells, I just work and I'll push something off to the side, and then I'll work and I'll push something off to the side, so that for me, I know that when I've stuck a thing over here, that's done. So whatever I still have left in front of me in the center or on the right hand side is what I got to work on. So for these two, I know that when I texture this, if I go to edge mode, that as you can see, I have shared edges, because even though we have multiple UVs, a single vertex can have multiple UVs attached to it, just depending on how many intersecting edges and how many cuts are coming in to that UV point. So it looks as though I should be able to rotate this thing down to here. Rotate this edge to the bottom and it should line up. So we're going to try that. So this edge I'm going to rotate down to the bottom. All right. So theoretically, this should line up, and that bottom edge does. But if I look at this, you can see that the rest of the faces are inverted, right? The top matches, the bottom matches, but these are flipped, right? That's because this is the bottom and this is the top, and if we think about a planar projection, the best place to get the front faces is from an undershot for the bottom and from a top shot from the top. But in order to make sure we don't have a harsh edge, we're going to want to make sure that our texture comes down and touches this line and then repeats itself from this line inwards. So it'll essentially use this as a mirroring line, right? That way we can hide our seam through a little bit of easy manipulation, a little bit of planning. But how do we get this UV shell flip the right direction? Well, we select this, and then over here on the right hand side in the UV Toolkit we have Transform. We have the Transform tab, and we come down towards the bottom of that Transform tab under where it says Tools, and then we have Flip. Now we have a U and a V. The V is vertically and the U is a horizontal line. So I'm going to put it on U and I'm going to hit my flip button. Notice it looked like it changed. Right click, go to U, Edges. This is still lined up, that's still lined up. Now we can see that the left is on the left, the right is on the right. So we can line these two up. So I'm going to go back to my shell. I'm going to translate this upwards. I'm just going to hold V and snap that center to the center. E to rotate so that it's generally on the same path. R, I'm going to scale this up a bit. Now, these aren't matched up perfectly, right? If we zoom in on these, come out of my UV shells just to UV, we can see that these edges don't line up perfectly. Now we could grab these and scale them together like so, but if I go too far, then they're back apart again. That's not the best way to go about this. We have a tool that does this for us. So if I come down into my Align and Snap, we have Match UVs. So what we're going to be able to do is come in here and grab these like so. We should be able to do all these at once. Hit Match UVs, and it snaps all of those to their closest partner, like so. So now when we put in our texture, this edge will mirror itself. It'll hit this edge and then come back. So the texture will hit and then roll back in. I'm going to go into my UV shells, and I'm just going to square this up a little bit with the world, like so. Put this up here. Looks like a good spot. Grab this. Get that pretty well lined up in there. And I'm going to scale these down so that they fit a little bit better. Now, I know that, let me unhide that and also shift select the nail So I have both the board and the nail selected out in my scene now, which allows me to show or see the UVs for both of these objects. I'm just going to highlight these UV shells. I'm going to highlight these UV shells, rotate them. Now, I should have grabbed these in object mode. There you go. That's why that's disappearing on me. Come in UV shell mode here. So I've rotated this so that they're generally horizontal. And I'm just going to shrink this down so that it fits over here. And scale it up so it uses as much room as I can get it to use without overlapping into another shell and without falling out of this border here. You'll notice that I'm leaving a very similar buffer here between these shells. Even though it's the same object, I still want to leave some buffer there, and I'm leaving a buffer between these two. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is the apple. So I'm going to minimize this guy, come out here to object mode. I'm just going to hide both of these, grab my apple out of my outliner and hit H and hit F to focus in on that. Now currently this has one split straight down a side and a sawtooth at the two tops. Right here. This is the default, generally the default for a sphere. Now it's been smushed around, smashed around a little bit, so it's not exactly what a sphere would start off. It would be more uniform across this entire thing, but generally that's what a sphere default would look like. So we're going to split this up so that the stem is a different chunk than the rest, which means we have to cut this stem off and do an unfold on it. Now for the most part, I'm okay with the rest of this layout. The locations of these cuts are fine for me. I'm just going to add a cut around here to separate the stem. So I'm going to come into my edge mode, right click, edge mode, and I'm going to double click that edge right there. And we're going to come back to our UVs, and I'm going to select my cut tool or cut function. From here, I'm going to right click, I'm going to go to my UV shells, and I'm going to unfold. Now this is going to give us a bit of a strange model here. This is going to be really difficult for us to texture our apple. For the stem, this will be fine, but for the apple, this is going to be rather difficult. So what we're going to use for the apple, this shell in particular, I'm going to select this shell, and I'm going to use a sphere projection. So I'm going to come back up to UVs. I'm going to come down here to a spherical projection. Click on my options. Make sure that create new UVs is turned off. You don't want that for this. I'm going to hit a project, and it's going to give me this circular bit right here. All right. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab these green manipulators right here, and I'm going to pull those all the way up. Right. If I'm looking at my UV here, let me pull this down so I can see both at the same time. Originally, you're looking at something like this, and it's about twice the size. So what this is going to do is it's going to change our V, and then this red here is going to change our U. So I'm going to grab that and squeeze this around till those two touch. Notice now it's fitting inside the box a little bit better, but we still have this weird issue going on down here. What this is the bottom UVs aren't lining up with the top UVs, so we have this weird overhang. We fix that by rotating our manipulator. Now the rotation point for the manipulator is this little red T down here on the bottom. Click that one time, and that gives us this manipulator. We're going to click this circle just one time, and now it gives us a rotation manipulator. So I'm going to rotate this on the y-axis, which is the green circle here. So I'm going to click this. I'm watching my UVs. As it's getting farther away, I can tell I'm moving the wrong direction, so I twist the other direction. I'm twisting until this looks right, like right there. You see how things lined up pretty well? I'm going to release. I don't have any overhang on the left or the right, and all these look like they're snapping together a little better. So from here, I'm pretty well done, and I can come in and straighten up all these if I choose. For the apple, for the most part, let me click out of that. There we go. So now we have this new shell. For the apple, for the most part, as long as my two outer edges here and my top are pretty well squared up, then I'm good to go. Now for these edges, we can sawtooth those if you want. That's an easy fix. So if I come into my edge mode and I just select these edges right there and I hit cut, now those are all going to be a sawtooth, but I have to separate those. Now I can do that by coming to UV mode and just selecting right here, just this one point, and then I hit unfold, and it starts to square those up and optimize a little bit. All right, I'm going to try and optimize on these and see if it helps or hurts, and it looks pretty bad. I'm going to undo that. All right. So I'm going to square these bottom pieces up. What those are doing is they're trying to adjust themselves towards the real world. Some of these are slightly longer than others, just based on the build of the model. So I'm going to fix this up just a little bit. I'm going to use my align. Let's do align center. I'll move those up just a wee bit. And I want to make sure that this edge is aligned to my left. Align this one to my right. There we go. And if you wanted to, you could come down and align each one of these, but for the most part, these are pretty good, so I'm not too terribly concerned about them. So from here, this is pretty well done. Right click, UV shell. I'm just going to scale this down a bit, and I'm going to show it over here for now because I know I'm done with that. Let me make this a little bit bigger again. So from here, we're going to work on the stem. Now we're going to deal with the stem the same way that we dealt with the board. So I know I'm going to be putting a wooden texture inside of here, and it's faster for me to do this than it will be for me to either hand this off to somebody and them to say, oh, what is this thing? Is this a hay bale or something crazy, or is it the stem of the apple? What's going on here? So I'm just going to pop this in so that when I put a square wood grain texture on it, I don't have to warp it to fit this funky design. Instead, I'm just going to fit this to a box. So I'm going to come into my UVs and start squaring these up. I'm just going to go from the right to the left. So this time I'll use my right one. And I'm just slowly squaring these. Notice I'm going to leave these top ones alone for the most part. Notice you still can't do all that because it's still connected to an endpoint. So you have to use the same technique of clicking and then double clicking the second from the last, and then just add in that last one. And we'll fix up some of the spacing here as we go. I'm going to start over on this side, and then I'll just fix these lines up. So I'm going to use my left. It's starting to get kind of crowded inside there. Square these up just a little bit. And I'm trying to align these a bit better. So they're pretty well centered on their column here. For the most part, you can kind of, they don't have to be 100% perfect in this area, but just getting them close is going to clean up your UVs a good bit, make it a little easier to texture these things. So from here, I'm just going to pop in and grab these and square those up. Do all my horizontals. And this is pretty much good to go. I could tweak these a little bit more if I really wanted to, but for the most part, this is pretty good. I have a few of these that are not quite equidistant right here. So if I want to square that up a bit, I can do like so. Nice thing is, because we've squared these things up to each other and done a bunch of alignments, the marquee tool works really well in these situations. So now we have, oops, wrong button, our stem and the apple. I'm going to grab these UV shells. I'm going to put this right about over here. I generally know where that exists. And just like we did for this, if we wanted to come down here and align all these, we can do that as well. I'm not going to bother with that for this particular demonstration. This apple stem, I'm going to rotate and stick it over here for now. I'm going to come into my object mode, right click, object mode. I'm going to unhide my board and nail, select them in my outliner, hit H, and just grab all those. Now inside of my UV editor, we can see all these pieces fit together really nice. And we can start laying them out to get maximum texel density per object. Now in this kind of situation, we're not, like I said, overly worried about the comparison between each object. What we're mostly concerned about is having individual objects well planned and well laid out. And a decent relation in texel density between the shells of the nail to one another and the shells of the apple to one another. All right. And how do we ensure that? Well, first thing I'm going to do is try to get as much size as I can out of these based on the available size or available real estate we have here. Pump that up just a little bit more, move that over, make sure it's not overlapping down here. We're good. We'll go on these sides and we're good here. All right. Now I could increase this considerably. So if I look at this apple and I say, okay, what's the texel density of this? The texel density can be found right over here. It's in transform underneath of our flip tool, texel density. By selecting a shell, I can come over here and I can hit get. Now this is going to be based on the map size. Right now we're going to be using a 2048 map. I'm going to say get and it's going to tell me that the texel density of this shell is 226.0201. So to make sure that the same texel density is applied to my stem, I click the stem and I hit set, and it shrinks it way, way down. Now if this is going to be a beauty shot and I'm wanting to get really close in on this, then I'm going to want to blow this up anyway and not worry a whole lot about that, right? Which is what I'm going to do for this particular set. But if I left that at 221, or I'm sorry, 226, then my wood here theoretically would have about the same texel density as my board, if not more. But for a beauty shot, if I'm zooming in on that apple, I would need more real estate here. And I could do the same thing here to here. If I want this to have the same texel density as these, I grab these, let's say the big one, this one's 566, and I would click on this one and say set, and it actually increases the size here. But we know that the top is the most important area here, not the bottom. So the top can be shrunk down. I'm sorry, the bottom can be shrunk back down to where it was, because very few people are going to see this. The top is the beauty location for that object. All right. So these are all done. My objects are all selected. I need to come out, make sure I'm in object mode when I select all these. And now we have to export this map and get it put into Photoshop. So we do that by coming into our image and UV snapshot, or we can come over here to this little camera right here at the top, and this will be our UV snapshot. So we can click that. And it's going to open up UV snapshot options. We tell it what type. I'm going to make this a PNG, 2048 by 2048, which matches our map size over here. I'm going to decide what color I want my edges. I'm going to leave them white. And we're going to decide where we're sticking this. So I'm going to save this out. For now, I'm just going to put this on my desktop. For you guys, I would put it inside of your images as an out UV. So I'm just going to put this on my desktop for now, and I'm going to call it board apple nail, so BAN underscore UVs. There we go. And I'm going to hit apply and close. And now out on my desktop, I have the BAN UVs PNG, which I'll be able to open up in Photoshop and begin texturing. All right, and I will see you at that point in the next video.